I hadn't eaten all day. My stomach twisted in hunger, but I wasn't about to complain. Not when I was down to my last few dollars and had no clue where my next meal would come from. Working double shifts at the diner barely covered rent. Forget savings. Forget luxuries. Every cent I earned went into surviving. That's when I saw them. An elderly couple sat at the corner booth, looking at the menu like they were searching for the cheapest thing they could afford. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he held it, and his wife, her face lined with years of struggle, kept glancing at him, concern written all over her features. I recognized that look. The look of two people who had known better days but were now scraping by. I knew what that felt like. When the waitress approached their table, the old man cleared his throat. "Just a cup of coffee for us both, please." My chest tightened. They were hungry. They just couldn't afford to eat. I don't know what came over me, but before I could stop myself, I walked over and said, "Put their meal on my tab." The waitress hesitated. "Are you sure?" "That's whatever they want. I'll cover it." The old man's eyes widened. "Son, you don't have to do that." "I want to," I said firmly. His wife's lips trembled as she whispered, "Bless you, dear." I gave them a smile and walked away before they could refuse. It wasn't much, but it was something. That night, I went home with an empty wallet and a grumbling stomach. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that I'd done something good. I had no idea that simple act would change my life forever. The next morning, I was woken up by a knock so loud it shook the walls of my tiny apartment. Groggy and still half asleep, I stumbled to the door. Probably my landlord, breathing down my neck about rent again. I braced myself, sighed, and yanked it open. I froze. Standing in the hallway was a man in an expensive suit. Not just any suit, the kind you only see on TV. The kind worn by people who could buy and sell my entire existence without blinking. And behind him, a sleek black car. A driver waiting at the curb. "What the—" I started, but the man cut me off. "Are you the young man who paid for an elderly couple's meal last night?" My pulse quickened. "Who's asking?" The man's lips twitched like he was holding back a smile. "Let's just say someone took notice, and they'd like to meet you." I frowned. "Who?" He handed me a card. Just a name. No number, no details. Vincent Caldwell. I had no idea who that was. But something told me my life was about to change in ways I never saw coming. I stared at the name on the card. Vincent Caldwell. It didn't ring a bell, but the man standing in front of me did. I'd seen his face before, somewhere. Maybe on the news, maybe in magazines. This wasn't just a guy in a suit. He was important. And he was standing at my door, like I mattered. "Look, I don't know who you think I am," I said cautiously, "but I just paid for a meal. That's it." The man nodded. "And that's exactly why Mr. Caldwell wants to meet you." I glanced at the luxury car behind him, my stomach twisting. This wasn't normal. Things like this didn't happen to people like me. And yet, I had nothing to lose. "All right," I muttered. "Let's go." The man smiled. "Good choice." The inside of the car smelled like expensive leather and something else I couldn't place. Maybe wealth itself. I sat stiffly, feeling out of place, while the man, who finally introduced himself as Mr. Hayes, typed something on his phone. "Who exactly is Vincent Caldwell?" I finally asked. Hayes glanced up. "A man who doesn't forget kindness." That didn't answer my question. "Am I in trouble?" Hayes actually chuckled. "No. Quite the opposite." I wanted to ask more, but the city blurred past the tinted windows, and soon we were pulling into a massive estate. The kind that screamed money. I swallowed hard. What had I just walked into? The house was a palace. A butler opened the door, and I stepped into a space bigger than my entire apartment building. And then I saw him. An old man, sitting in a plush chair, eyes sharp despite his age. "Come in, son," he said. I hesitated. "Are you Vincent Caldwell?" He nodded. "And you must be the young man who paid for my meal last night." I felt my heart stop. Him? This was the old man from the diner? But he had nothing. He looked like he was barely scraping by. What? How? He smiled. Sit. I have something to tell you. I had to be sure, Mr. Caldwell said, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Sure about what? I asked, still reeling. That you're a good person. I frowned. I don't get it. You weren't. I gestured vaguely. You didn't look like a millionaire? He chuckled. I wasn't. Not at that moment. I blinked. He leaned forward. I lost faith in people a long time ago. I wanted to see if kindness still existed, without money involved. So, you were testing me? In a way. He tapped his cane against the floor. And you passed. Then he dropped the bombshell. I want to change your life. I should have laughed. Called him crazy. Walked away. But something about the way he said it made me pause. Why? I asked cautiously. Because I can. My mouth went dry. What does that mean? Mr. Caldwell studied me for a moment before saying, How would you like to work for me? I swallowed. Doing what? Something worth more than money. I had no idea what that meant. But when someone like him makes an offer, you don't say no. I'm listening. I expected luxury. I expected some fancy job where I stood in the background, watching rich people sip champagne. I did not expect to be thrown into manual labor. Hayes handed me a mop. Clean the floors. I blinked. What? You want a future? Earn it. It didn't make sense. I'd expected an office, a suit. Not this. But I'd scrubbed floors my whole life. This wasn't new. So, without a word, I grabbed the mop and got to work. I worked all day. My arms burned, my back ached, and the rich people walking past barely spared me a glance. But Mr. Caldwell? He watched me, studied me, like he was waiting for something. Finally, as I finished, he nodded. Good. That's it? Hayes stepped forward. Come back tomorrow. I should have walked away. This was insane. But something in Caldwell's eyes told me this wasn't just about cleaning floors. This was a test, and I wanted to pass. For a week, I cleaned, polished, hauled things around like a servant. Then one night, Caldwell called me into his study. I expected another test. Instead, he slid a folder across the desk. I opened it, and my breath caught. Inside were documents worth millions. This is yours, he said. I felt my heart stop. What? You earned it. I stared at him, my entire world tilting. What the hell was happening? I don't understand, I said, voice barely above a whisper. You don't even know me. Caldwell smiled. But I do. My pulse pounded. I cleaned floors for a week. That doesn't mean I deserve this. He leaned back. The real test wasn't the work. I frowned. Then what was it? Humility. I gripped the arms of my chair. And now what? His eyes gleamed. Now you decide what kind of man you want to be. I stared at the documents in front of me. Millions. More money than I could ever dream of. And yet, it didn't feel real. I looked up at Mr. Caldwell. Why me? He folded his hands. Because you gave without expecting anything in return. But this is too much. Is it? He tilted his head. What would you do if I told you to walk away? My throat tightened. You'd go back to struggling. Back to scraping by. Or, he tapped the folder. You could take this and change your life forever. I swallowed hard. What's the catch? Caldwell's eyes glimmered. Only that you use it wisely. And just like that, my fate was in my hands. The next morning, I woke up in a hotel suite bigger than my entire apartment complex. The bed felt too soft, the air too clean. I wasn't used to this. I looked at the envelope Caldwell had given me before I left his mansion. Inside was a bank account. In my name. With enough money to erase every struggle I'd ever had. It didn't feel real. I checked my phone. A message from Hayes. Mr. Caldwell is expecting you. Don't be late. I had no idea what today would bring. But I knew one thing. I wasn't the same broke kid anymore. Caldwell greeted me with a smirk. You look like a man who didn't sleep. I chuckled dryly. Hard to sleep when your life flips upside down overnight. He nodded approvingly. Good. It means you understand the weight of it. I sat across from him. What now? Now, I teach you how to keep it. My stomach clenched. I hadn't thought about that. Money could be spent. Lost. You thought the hard part was getting rich? He chuckled. The real challenge is staying rich. I leaned in. I was ready to learn. Caldwell didn't just throw money at me. He made me earn my place. I shadowed him everywhere, meetings, business deals, high-stakes negotiations. I watched how he spoke, how he commanded a room, and most importantly, how he never trusted anyone completely. Money makes people dangerous, he warned me one evening. The richer you are, the more they'll want to take. I nodded, taking it all in. I wouldn't be naive. I wasn't just here to be wealthy. I was here to survive. I had never been in a high-rise boardroom before. Yet here I was, sitting beside Caldwell as he negotiated a deal worth millions. I watched as men in suits, men who looked like they ruled the world, hum on his every word. And then, halfway through, he turned to me. Tell them your thoughts, he said casually. My heart slammed into my ribs. What? He leaned back. You're my protege. Speak. The room went silent. They were all watching me. I swallowed hard, then took a breath. It was time to prove I belonged. I looked at the faces staring at me. Men who could ruin me with a single phone call. And then I remembered something Caldwell had told me. They only have power if you let them. I squared my shoulders. This deal isn't balanced. One of the men frowned. Excuse me? I pointed at the papers. You're offering too little. Caldwell's connections alone are worth more than the numbers on that page. A tense silence filled the room. Then Caldwell smiled. Smart, he murmured. The men across the table exchanged glances. Then one nodded. Let's renegotiate. And just like that, I had made my first move in this new world. I was starting to understand something. Money wasn't about spending. It was about control. But control had its dangers. People started noticing me. Some with respect. Others with envy. Whispers followed me wherever I went. Who is he? Caldwell's new pet project? He won't last. I ignored them. But deep down, I knew this world would eat me alive if I wasn't careful. And something told me, not everyone wanted me to succeed. I was walking back to my car when I felt it. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I was being watched. I turned, just in time to see a dark figure stepping toward me. Nice car, the man said. His voice was low, dangerous. My pulse spiked. This wasn't random. I stepped back, not interested in trouble. The man smirked. You already got trouble, kid. You just don't see it yet. Then he disappeared into the night. And I realized something chilling. Someone wanted me gone. I burst into Caldwell's office. Who did I piss off? He didn't even look up. The moment you sat in that boardroom, you pissed off a dozen people. I clenched my jaw. Someone approached me. That got his attention. His eyes darkened. What did they say? I told him. For the first time, Caldwell looked serious. You've made enemies, he said simply. I swallowed hard. So, what do I do? His lips curled. You learn to fight back. Caldwell wasn't just teaching me business anymore. He was teaching me survival. How do you beat someone richer than you? He asked one night. I shook my head. I don't know. He smirked. You outthink them. That's when I realized. Wealth was war. And I was in the middle of it. The man who had threatened me? I found out his name. And I made my move. A business deal he had been working on for months. I destroyed it. When he heard, he came storming into my office. You little. I smirked. Problem. His face turned red. I had just sent a message to everyone. I wasn't to be messed with. I sat behind the massive oak desk in Caldwell's office. No, my office now. The city skyline stretched out before me, and the weight of my new position settled on my shoulders. I had won. I had taken every lesson, every hardship, and climbed higher than anyone ever expected. But the moment you rise, they start waiting for you to fall. A knock at the door. Hayes stepped in, face unreadable. You need to see this. He placed a folder in front of me. I flipped it open, and my stomach dropped. Someone was coming for me, and they weren't playing fair. I scanned the documents. It wasn't just one person. It was an entire group. Powerful men. Connected. Dangerous. They don't think you belong here, Hayes said. I clenched my jaw. Because I wasn't born into this? He nodded. They see you as an outsider. A threat. I leaned back, exhaling sharply. I knew this wouldn't be easy. But if they thought I'd roll over and surrender, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Caldwell had taught me something important. The one who makes the first move controls the game. So I did my homework, dug into every secret these men had buried. Then, one by one, I hit them where it hurt. A corrupt investment? Exposed. An affair hidden from the public? Revealed. A shady offshore account? Frozen. They wanted to ruin me? I burned their foundations first. And soon the power began shifting in my favor. I walked into the boardroom, where my enemies had gathered. They thought I was weak. A kid playing CEO. I let them talk. Let them think they had control. Then I dropped a single piece of paper on the table. Every secret I had uncovered. Silence. Now, I said, voice calm. Are we still pretending I don't belong here? No one spoke. Because they all knew. I had just won. Just when I thought I had everything under control. Hayes walked in, face tight. We have a problem. I frowned. What now? He hesitated. It's Caldwell. My chest tightened. Caldwell? The man who had given me everything? What happened? Hayes exhaled sharply. He's been playing both sides. I sat across from Caldwell, the man who had once been my mentor. Tell me it's not true, I said. His expression was unreadable. What do you think, son? Rage burned in my chest. You built me up just to tear me down? He sighed. I built you up so you could survive. I clenched my fists. By setting me up to fail? Caldwell leaned forward. By making sure you knew that in this world, you trust no one. Caldwell had betrayed me, but he had also taught me everything I knew. So when the board met one last time to decide my fate, I was ready. I had the votes, the backing, the power. And when Caldwell realized he had lost, he simply smiled. Not bad, kid, he murmured. Then he walked away, leaving me with everything. I stood at the top of the skyscraper, looking down at the city. I had come from nothing. I had been tested, betrayed, threatened. And yet, I was still here. No longer the poor kid struggling to survive. I was the one in control now. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid anymore.